Hello listener and welcome to Nancy Goodaim the Space Ranger. This is chapter 21 of 56 and if you've been following the story, thank you. So, a hen, a daw, a tree and away we go. Hey lads, are we missing anyone? The question that was being asked by European Space Agency mission specialist Bart McMorrow. In the late afternoon, outside the door of a shed on Jupiter. The shed in question was being used to store dead whistling spontalagers. The shed was owned by a Jupiterian named Breezy McAspug. Her husband Natey was dead and his body was lying naked in the middle of the shed. A Martian waitress/astronaut called Martina Ruddlesplitch and a Martian sheriff were in the shed when Bart asked the question. They both exited the shed to answer him. "No," said the sheriff. "I don't think so," said Martina. "Right, it's just, well, wasn't there 4 of us a minute ago?" "I'm not sure," said Martina. I don't think so." "There was not," said the sheriff. "It was just me, you, Martina, Nancy, and that dead naked Jupiterian lad lying face down in the shed." "We're missing Nancy," said Bart. He stuck his head back in the open door of the shed, then back out, then looked over to the treehouse, the stream, and finally glanced into the forest. "The wizard's coming," he said. "Where?" asked the sheriff. "There, look through the trees, over behind the house, close to the stream. You see, upstream, in the direction we just came, do you see?" "How can I look through the trees? It's a well-known fact that they obscure your view." "We should leave," noted Martina. Martina's "we should leave" was prompted by an unnatural green glowing cloud working its way through the trees. The wizard Oberon was at the centre of the glowing cloud and was walking with a pained limp. He was also making sure that everyone in earshot knew he was angry. "4 extraterrestrial gleebers think they can make their way into my forest and kill my fuddle-down washerwoman and break my skittled-up wand. And then they think they can bugger off as if nothing's going to happen to them." The wizard-containing cloud of green plasma that had been approaching Bart, Martina, the sheriff and the figuratively invisible Nancy suddenly stopped at the beginning of the area of roughly clear ground that Breezy McAspug considered to be a garden. "Are you up there, Mrs. Aspug?" roared the wizard. He was staring impatiently up at a treehouse that had been built into 3 trees above Breezy's rough attempt at a garden lawn. Now, you may be wondering what staring impatiently looks like, and also what happened to European Space Agency mission specialist Nancy McGinley to make her figuratively invisible, because right up to the end of the last chapter, she had been leading Bart, Martina and the sheriff away from the injured wizard. Now, if you were wondering that, then the answers are, firstly, a furrowed brow with eyes darting to various objects in the foreground, and secondly, the ladder of insignificance. By holding the ladder of insignificance, European Space Agency mission specialist Nancy McGinley became invisible in the eyes and minds of living things. As it is a well-known fact that no matter where you are in the universe, if you are holding an old ladder, it makes you appear both busy and also not really relevant to whatever the observer is doing, which, like the stream pointed out, has advantages and disadvantages. "Quick, grab hold of the ladder," whispered Nancy. "Did you hear someone?" asked Bart. "Just the wizard. We should run for the trees while he's distracted," replied Martina. "Grab the ladder," urged Nancy. "I definitely heard someone," noted Bart. "Of course you did. The wizard is over there yelling at the top of his voice," said the sheriff. "How can you not be hearing someone?" The muffled, croaky voice of Breezy McAspug echoed from above the roughly cleared garden. "Will ye lot piss off? I'm having a shite." "It is just I, the wizard Oberon, Mrs. Aspug. Schlocht is dead," yelled the wizard. "Sorry, wizard. I thought you were someone else. My apologies. I'm still having a shite, though." "Yes, Mrs. Aspug. I'm looking for 4 extraterrestrials." "Good for you. What happened to Schlocht?" "He got a crossbow bolt in the neck, and it killed him. Poor lad. He wouldn't have liked that. Sorry for your loss. Can you call back later?" "Yes, Mrs. Aspug." Nancy had been listening to the interaction between the injured green plasma cloud-shrouded wizard Oberon and the defecating Breezy. The wizard's reaction struck her as incongruous. So much so that the "quick, grab the ladder" sentence she was about to shout came out as, "That was a bit strange." "What was a bit strange?" asked the sheriff. "What do you mean, what was a bit strange, Sheriff?" asked Martina. What do you mean, what was a bit strange? You just said it was a bit strange. Whatever it was, Martina." "I didn't say anything was a bit strange. We better get going," urged Bart. He, along with the sheriff and Martina and the insignificant and unnoticed Nancy, now had a clear view of the wizard, which meant the wizard also had a clear view of them. "Freeze where you are, space people!" he yelled. Bart calculated that it would take the injured and limping wizard 40 seconds to cross the roughly cleared garden between the stream bank, where the wizard had been shouting up at the defecating Breezy, and the outside of the Spontalager storage shed / final resting place of Natey McAspug, where he, Martina and the sheriff were standing. "No!" he yelled. Bart then turned to run back into the dense forest surrounding the roughly cleared garden and immediately tripped over something. The something he tripped over was long, wooden, and had European Space Agency mission specialist Nancy McGinley's hands attached. "Grab hold of this," she urged, and he did. "Where did Bart go?" asked Martina, who had been about to follow Bart to wherever he had been planning to go, but was now standing looking around her, unsure of what to do next. "Who?" asked the sheriff, who had also been about to follow Bart to wherever he planned to go, and was now standing looking around him, but was doing so in a confident and self-important way, so as to pretend not to be unsure of what to do. "I'm going to enslave you, woman," yelled the wizard. "And torture you, sheriff," he added. "Will the two of you just grab hold of this?" yelled Nancy. In theory, Martina and the sheriff were standing next to Bart, Nancy and the ladder, but because of the ladder's insignificant properties, Bart and Nancy might as well have been back on board the space rocket. "What's wrong with you? Just grab hold of this," urged Bart. He had been overcome with a profound sense of his own significance in the grand scale of the universe. It had been both frightening and comforting, and the comforting part was in knowing he was simply irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, or even in the modest scheme of things. And the wizard Obleron's stated desire to torture, enslave and murder 4 extraterrestrial visitors to the Forest of Proverbs fell squarely in the modest scheme of things. Although, of course, not for Bart, Nancy, Martina or the sheriff. "Quick, sheriff, ask the guts for help," yelled Martina. "Good idea," he replied. The angry, limping wizard Oberon was now over halfway from the edge of the stream / front of Breezy McAsbug's treehouse to his stated victims. Noted the sheriff. He then cocked his head sideways, closed his eyes and looked upwards. Nancy quickly calculated the outcome of possible divine intervention against the sure and certain charge and close-quarter magic torture dispensing wizard, and decided to take matters into her own hands by releasing the ladder from her hands and rapidly grabbing Martina and the sheriff. "Here, the ladder is here," she said. "Grab it," she added. "Thank the guts," said Martina. "Nancy has returned to save us, sheriff." The sheriff opened his eyes, looked at Nancy and then nodded to Martina. "Good. The gut just told me something along the lines of that would happen," he noted. "Grab hold of the ladder," repeated Nancy. The only problem with her request was that there was no ladder apparent. "What ladder?" asked Martina. "The ladder of insignificance." "Where is it?" asked the sheriff. It's I was just holding it, so it can't be far. It's The angry, limping wizard Oberon had now covered over 3/4 of the distance between the edge of the stream / Breezy McAsbug's house to his stated victims, 3 of whom were visible to him. "I had it just now," continued Nancy, "with that lad, I forget his name, you know, the lad who crewed St. Leica 1 with myself and Commander Staunton." "Run!" shouted Martina. "Stay right where you are!" shouted the rapidly approaching infuriated wizard. "Nobody move," advised the sheriff. "We should stand our ground. Cowering from Jupiterians is no way for a Martian to behave." Martina turned to run, turned back to the approaching wizard, who looked angry, looked at Nancy, who looked confused, and looked at the sheriff, who looked scared. "But we were running away before we got here," she said. "I'm going to rip your Ontogrian flomps right out through the anterior of your uppermost appendage, fat man," yelled the wizard. "And you, washerwoman, do you realise how dirty my underpants are?" The wizard may have been better served by focusing his energy into closing the gap on his static prey. His 27-word mid-stride rant delayed him for 3.87256 seconds, exactly the amount of time the sheriff needed to rethink his situation and shout, "Run!" Nancy and Martina immediately turned away from the angry wizard and made to break into a stride. They were both followed by the sheriff. Nancy was the first to fall, followed by Martina, and both of them broke the fall of the sheriff, which was less than optimal. "What are you doing lying on the ground holding a ladder, Bart? Don't you know there's a wizard after us?" asked Nancy. "Get off me, sheriff, you big fat lump," yelled Martina. "Grab hold of the ladder, Ollie," said Bart. They did, which stopped the wizard in his tracks and caused him to develop a confused expression, look around blankly, check the pockets of his dress suit, scratch his head, check the pockets of his dress suit again, and sit down in the roughly cleared purple vegetation that Breezy McAsbug considered a garden. Nancy, Bart, Martina and the sheriff watched from a distance of about 8 metres. Each of them were squatting down next to and gripping the ladder. "The universe is a vast and empty place," said the sheriff. "It is," agreed Bart. "You know, I was just thinking that myself," said Martina. "I wonder if the wizard can hear us," wondered Nancy. "Can you hear us, Obleron?" yelled Bart. His shout got no response. The wizard looked over at the shed containing the body of 874,368 dead spontalagers and Natey McAsbug and looked nervously up at the treehouse. "That was a bit strange," said Nancy, for the second time of the afternoon. "What was a bit strange?" asked the sheriff. "The way the wizard looked up at Breezy's treehouse. It's as if he's afraid of her. And did you hear him earlier? Yes, Mrs. Asbug. It's just a bit strange that an all-powerful wizard would be so polite, especially as he's been ranting bloody murder beforehand." "Oh, right," said Bart. I see. So holding onto a ladder next to a shed of dead whatchamacallits in order to be insignificant enough not to be noticed by an injured demented wizard on planet Jupiter is fair enough. But if the wizard is polite to an elderly lady, then suddenly it's suspicious. I wonder about you sometimes, Nancy, you know that? I'm just saying, it's a bit odd, that's all. The wizard then turned from his nervous treehouse gaze and walked right past Bart, Nancy, Martina, the sheriff and the ladder. This took him to the outside of the Spontalager shed. He took another nervous look up at the treehouse and darted inside. What's he up to? Asked the sheriff. Looking for us, I think, replied Nancy. He'd never be bothered with the likes of us, said Martina. The wizard stepped back out of the shed with an armful of dead Spontalagers, looked nervously up at the treehouse for a third time, bit the head of two of the Spontalagers and slunk off back into the forest. Bart, Nancy, Martina and the sheriff watched as the wizard and the green cloud of plasma that surrounded him disappeared from view. Bart nodded over to the shed. You must be able to eat those things, he said. We should try, he added. Good idea, agreed the sheriff. No offence, but they can't be any worse than your cooking, Martina, because it is rotten. Whatever you do, don't let go of the ladder, said Nancy. We might never find each other again. Fair enough, said Bart. He then stood up and moved towards the shed, which meant Nancy, Martina and the sheriff had to do the same. And so it was for the afternoon of the third day of the first human expedition to another planet. An insulted Martian waitress / astronaut named Martina Ruddlesplitch, a Martian sheriff. European Space Agency Mission Specialist Nancy McGinley. European Space Agency Mission Specialist Bart McMurrow. A defecating naked treehouse-dwelling elderly Jupiterian named Breezy McGaspug. An injured, wandless, angry Spontalager-ingesting wizard named Oberon. And a very insignificant ladder. Alright now, and if you have stuck that through to the end, thank you and thanks for keeping with the story. There'll be another episode out next week.